Today, gaming is a global force. It fills arenas, drives billion-dollar companies, and offers careers once thought impossible. Universities give scholarships for it. Major brands sponsor. When video games first appeared, no one thought they would become one of the most powerful industries in the world. To many parents in the 1970s, games were just noisy distractions, a novelty machine sitting in the corner of a bar or a bowling alley. To critics, they were a passing fad that would fade just like hula hoops or pinball machines. But to children and teenagers, the glowing screens and beeping sounds were irresistible. They were portals into another world. The company that first cracked this magic was Atari. Founded in 1972 by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney in California. Atari's first big hit was Pong, a simple game of bouncing a digital ball back and forth across the screen. The rules were easy to grasp, but the competition was fierce. Players lined up to test themselves, dropping in quarters just to play one more round. Pong was not just a game, it was proof that people would pay to interact with technology. By the late 1970s, Atari had turned into a household name. They released the Atari 2600, one of the first home consoles that allowed people to play different games using cartridges. For the first time, video games weren't just something you found in a noisy arcade. They could live in your living room. Kids begged their parents for Ataris for Christmas. Parents, unsure at first, eventually gave in as they saw how much joy the games brought. Families would gather around the television to play Space Invaders, Asteroids, or Adventure. It was the beginning of gaming as a social activity inside the home. The arcade boom of the late 1970s and early 1980s was something the world had never seen. In 1980, Namco's Pac-Man swept across the globe. It wasn't just a game, but it became a cultural icon. There were Pac-Man lunchboxes, and
as you can see here, the Namco version, which just came out on the Nintendo 3DS as a virtual console release, looks identical to the Tengen version. There's a reason for this, and that's because licensed, unlicensed, Tengen, or Namco, they're all based on the same 1984 Famicom game.
Organization dedicated to recording and verifying high scores. He organized national tournaments, where the best players from around the country came together to see who really was number one.
Come on in. It's almost another world here in the video arcades of America. 1 billion games are played every month, a quarter each for Escape, which can last a long time if you're skilled. Pit yourself against the computer. Millions, mostly teenagers, have. So many, in fact, that psychologists are beginning to worry that some youths are becoming spaced out on the space game.
Long before million-dollar esports arenas, this was where gaming competitions took their first steps. But just as the industry soared, disaster struck. By 1983, the market collapsed in what became known as the video game crash. The problem was simple: too many consoles, too many poorly made games, and not enough trust from consumers. One of the most infamous flops was Atari's E.T. The extraterrestrial rushed to market for the holiday season. But it was so bad that thousands of unsold cartridges were reportedly buried in the New Mexico desert. Parents, once willing to buy consoles for their children, lost faith. Sales in the U.S. dropped from $3 billion in 1983 to just $100 million 2 years later. Critics declared video games dead, but they weren't. They were waiting for a savior. That savior came in the form of a Japanese company, Nintendo. In 1985, Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America. Unlike Atari, Nintendo was cautious.
This kind of challenge, this kind of flying, crashing feeling. When you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come: the games of Super Nintendo. No one else creates this kind of experience, because no one else creates these kinds of games. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
They marketed the NES not as a video game console, which still carried a bad reputation, but as an entertainment system. The console came with a toy-like robot called Oropi to appeal to skeptical parents. What really won people over, however, were the games. Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid were instant classics. Suddenly, gaming had storylines, characters, and adventures that pulled players into whole new worlds. Nintendo restored faith in video games and turned them into a global phenomenon. By the end of the 1980s, the NES had sold more than 60 million units. The industry was thriving again. The 1990s brought even more excitement, often remembered as the era of the console wars. Sega entered the scene with the Genesis in 1989, challenging Nintendo's dominance. Their rivalry was fierce. Sega's marketing slogan, "Genesis does what Nintendo," summed up the spirit of the time. On playgrounds and in living rooms, kids argued over which was better, Mario or Sonic. The competition pushed both companies to innovate, bringing faster gameplay, better graphics, and unforgettable characters. By the mid-1990s, the industry had entered the 3D age. Sony's PlayStation, released in 1994, revolutionized gaming with CD-based discs instead of cartridges, allowing for more storage and more cinematic experiences. Games like Final Fantasy VI, Metal Gear Solid, and Gran Turismo felt bigger, deeper, and more ambitious than anything before. Gaming was no longer a toy for kids. It was becoming a serious form of entertainment that rivaled movies and music. But while the West was locked in console wars, something different was happening in South Korea. In 1998, Blizzard released StarCraft: Brood War, a real-time strategy game for PC. Koreans embraced it like no other country. PC cafes, known as PC bangs, were packed with players battling each other deep into the night. What began as a pastime soon grew into a spectacle. Matches were televised on national TV. Players like Lim Yo-won became celebrities, filling stadiums with fans. They signed sponsorships, gave interviews, and had fan clubs. Korea had just invented what we now know as professional esports. By the turn of the millennium, gaming had gone from a novelty in arcades to an international cultural force. It had survived collapse, reinvented itself, and created communities that spanned continents. Yet the story was only halfway told. The rise of streaming, global esports, and gaming as a full-fledged career path was just beginning. When the new millennium began, gaming was already a major form of entertainment, but it still carried stereotypes. Parents often shook their heads at kids spending long hours in front of screens, muttering that nothing good will come from video games. Teachers warned that games were a distraction from schoolwork. To many adults, gaming was still a phase, something you grew out of. But the kids who grew up in arcades and with consoles in their living rooms weren't planning to let go. And the 2000s would prove them right. In 2001, Microsoft entered the gaming industry with the first Xbox. It wasn't just another console. It was built with an internet connection in mind. The internet was a game changer. By 2002, Xbox Live went online, allowing players across the world to compete without leaving their homes. A teenager in New York could face off against another in London, or a squad in Tokyo. For the first time, gaming had created a global arena that existed 24/7. Meanwhile, on PC, a new kind of online game took over. In 2004, Blizzard launched World of Warcraft, an online role-playing game where millions of players lived inside a shared fantasy world. Players formed guilds, went on raids, and spent hours working together to defeat powerful enemies. At its peak, World of Warcraft had more than 12 million subscribers. The most important leap in the 2000s came from South Korea, which had already shown the world what professional gaming could look like with StarCraft. In 2000, the Korean Esports Association was founded to oversee competitions and teams. Televised StarCraft leagues became national sensations. Top players like Boxer and later Lee Young-ho were treated like athletes, complete with sponsorships and fan clubs. When Flash, barely a teenager, rose to the top in the late 2000s, Korean fans dubbed him the ultimate weapon. Prize pools grew, and stadiums filled with screaming fans. The West caught on to this, and in 2002, Major League Gaming was founded in New York, giving American players a stage. Titles like Halo 2, Call of Duty, and Super Smash Bros. Became staples of the MLG circuit. Prize pools were modest at first, but the visibility was groundbreaking. For the first time in the US, parents saw kids traveling to compete in tournaments and even signing contracts. Gaming was no longer something you outgrew, it was something you could grow into. But even so, we would say, 2010s brought the real explosion. In 2011, a new platform launched that would change gaming forever: Twitch. Suddenly, players could broadcast their games live to audiences around the world. Watching games wasn't just for those in the arcade or stadium anymore. It was for millions online. Streamers like Tyler Blevins, Imane Anis, and Michael Grzycki turned into celebrities, attracting sponsorships from brands like Adidas and Red Bull. Viewers tuned in not just for the gameplay, but for the personalities behind the screen. And so with this, a new career was born: the full-time streamer. While Twitch gave individuals power, esports tournaments were scaling up. Valve's The International, first held in 2011 for Dota 2, stunned the world with a $1.6 million prize pool. Just 4 years later, in 2015, the prize pool had ballooned to over $18 million, thanks to player crowdfunding. By 2019, it crossed $34 million, making instant millionaires out of the winning team. Similar growth did happen with the League of Legends, where the World Championship launched in 2011. Packed stadiums like the Staples Center in Los Angeles and the Bird's Nest in Beijing. At the same time, gaming organizations were transforming into something new. FaZe Clan, founded in 2010 as a trick-shotting team on YouTube, grew into a global brand worth hundreds of millions. They weren't just competing, they were selling merchandise, partnering with brands like Nissan, and living in lavish gaming houses that became content goldmines. 100 Thieves, founded in 2017 by former Call of Duty pro Matthew Haig, blended esports, streetwear, and lifestyle branding. Meanwhile, Korea's T1 continued to dominate competitive League of Legends, proving the long-term power of structured esports teams. These organizations didn't just make money, they turned gamers into brand ambassadors, complete with the message was clear. Gaming wasn't just entertainment, it was now a legit way to earn a living. By the early 2020s, gaming's numbers were staggering. In 2020 alone, global revenues hit $180 billion, surpassing both the movie and music industries combined. Esports prize pools rivaled tennis and golf. Streamers earned millions annually. Organizations like FaZe Clan went public on the stock market. Even the International Olympic Committee began to acknowledge esports, hinting at inclusion in future games. The journey had come full circle. From kids stacking quarters on arcade machines in the 1980s to modern players signing deals with Gucci, Nike, and Coca-Cola, gaming had become one of the most influential industries on Earth. But in all honesty, the future is only growing bigger. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence are pushing the boundaries of what games can be. Kids today dream not just of being astronauts or athletes, but of being streamers, pro players, or game developers. And unlike in the past, when parents laughed, today those dreams are taken much more seriously. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like, share, and comment what you think about this now lucrative industry we have for ourselves. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.